Just like we did on the front of this vehicle, I'm going to use a C-clamp to go around the caliper and come against the pad and the rotor, and then squeeze the piston in on our caliper so that we can remove it easily from the rotor without fighting it. Just takes a couple of turns to get it depressed enough to slide right off of that rotor. And take the caliper right off. And again, not hanging it from the brake hose, we'll just set it on the rear trailing arm. With the caliper out of the way, we can remove the brake pads for inspection. These brakes are in need of service. With the pads removed, we can now go to the back and undo the two caliper mount to rear knuckle bolts. Alright, we're going to go ahead and get this caliper mount all ready for the new friction to go into it. We'll start with replacing the abutment clips here. Also want to inspect the caliper slides and make sure that they freely move to keep the brake pads from hanging up and premature wearing. Alright, we've removed the abutment clips, and one thing that we'll want to make sure is in good shape is the caliper slide, that they're not binding or seizing. That would cause our new friction material to prematurely wear, and these are in good shape just like the front was on that vehicle. Otherwise we would want to pull those out of the rubber boots and then re-grease them. So with those out, I can clean where the abutment clips snap into place with the wire brush, removing all the rust and the scale. And then we'll apply some disc brake caliper slide grease. And snap into place the new clips, making sure that they're fully seated in the caliper mount. And then we'll put a little bit more grease on the top side. Now we're ready to reinstall the caliper mount. Right, we're now ready to reinstall the rear pads. It's important to take note of the orientation of the rear anti-squeal clip. It goes on the rear side installation, pointing upwards. We're now going to get the caliper ready for reinstallation by pushing the piston back. We'll do the same thing that we did on the front by installing the old brake pad against the piston, the retraction tool, so that we don't push directly on the caliper piston, potentially causing damage. We'll push it back nice and slow until it seats against the caliper body. Remove the caliper installation tool and the old brake pad. The caliper is ready to install. We're going to put Loctite on the caliper to caliper mount bolts, and then reinstall the caliper. And we're going to have to hold the caliper guides from spinning as we did during removal to retorque the caliper to caliper mount bolts. We'll get them tight with a pair of wrenches, and then we'll switch over to a torque wrench. Here we're going to take a torque wrench now and torque these caliper to caliper mount bolts to 28 foot-pounds. With the caliper torqued in place, we'll just verify that it's not binding and it moves freely on the slides. We're now ready to reinstall the wheel. With the rotor clean of any handprints or grease, we're now ready to reinstall the wheel and tire assembly. Alright, I switched to the impact gun to run these down just at very low torque to get them all seated before we lower it to the ground and torque them to specification. With the vehicle back on the ground, we can now torque the lug nuts to the specification, which is 140 foot-pounds. Torquing it with a wrench will ensure that we don't put any uneven loads on the rotor, possibly causing distortion, which would lead to pedal vibration. The end of every brake job should be concluded with a road test to burnish in the new pads to the new replacement rotors. This road test would require at least 20 stops at above 30 miles an hour with gradual brake pressure. This will ensure that the new pads fully seat into the new rotors by the time the customer is given the keys back to their vehicle.